Alright, so this is going to be part H. It's basic anatomy in the human body. A little bit of physiology, but mainly just anatomy. Adults are just outdated children. Our quote for this lecture. Alright, so the basic body systems we're going to go over in this lecture are going to be the integumentary, which is skin, the digestive, or GI. You may hear it also called gastrointestinal. Then the musculoskeletal, cardiovascular, respiratory, nervous, sensory, endocrine, urinary, and reproductive. You also have a lymphatic system, but that one's not covered in detail in the TAR. It is in the book though, and I do believe it is on the chapter 5 or chapter 9 test, but it is not part of the TAR. Basic terms you need to know for this lecture are going to be the homeostasis, which is the name for the condition in which all the body systems are working the best. Think of it, stasis is still. Your body doesn't have to do anything to get it back into balance if it's already still. So metabolism is the physical or chemical processes of the body. It's going to be how you digest your food, how you get energy, that kind of thing. Organs are going to be groups of tissues of a particular type. Tissues are groups of cells of a certain type that all perform a similar task. And cells are going to be the building blocks of the body. It's important to know that it can get smaller than a cell. However, for this lecture, cells are going to be your building blocks. Integumentary system is the first one on our list. It's going to be your skin system. So your integument is the natural protective coating. It's the largest organ and system in your body. It protects against bacteria and injury to the internal organs. It prevents loss of water, regulates the temperature, and it's also considered a sense organ. Three main layers of the integumentary system is going to be the epidermis, which is your outer layer. It's the layer that gives your skin the color. It's thinner than your dermis. It contains both dead and living cells. It also has nerve endings, but it does not contain blood vessels. So if you cut yourself and you start to bleed, you point through the epidermis down into your dermis or even lower than that. The dermis is the second layer. It's the inner layer of the skin. It contains your nerves, sweat glands, sebaceous glands, and hair roots. And then you have your subcutaneous tissue, which is the fat layer of your skin. All right, here you have a picture for the visual learners. You can see the top layer there is the epidermis, and it does contain the pores and the hair shafts and openings on the top. And then you have your dermis. You can see, let me get a pen so I can show you guys. Right here, it's got the sweat gland. You have your root to your hair shaft. You have all your little blood vessel capillaries. You've got your nerve ending. And notice how the nerve ending keeps going down into the subcutaneous tissue and the connective tissue. Then in the subcutaneous tissue, this little stuff right here is connective tissue and adipose, which is fat. And then this is your artery, or a little bitty arteriole. It's like a tiny little artery. And then this one here is going to be your vein. That's going to carry the unoxygenated blood, and the red carries the oxygen back up to the skin. And you can see that it goes all the way up to the top nearly, but not into this top layer right here, because this layer is dead. Doesn't live anymore once it gets up there. Sorry for my scribbling. I know it looks kind of rough, but I didn't realize it was so hard to draw with a computer mouse. Normal changes in aging for the integumentary system. Your skin gets drier, thinner, it's more fragile, it's easy to damage, it's less elastic. Your fatty tissue is lost, it can feel colder, your hair thins and turns gray. Nails get harder, but they're more brittle, and your skin starts to get dry and itchy from the lack of oil in those glands. Now, pay attention to where it says it's more easily damaged. That is especially true in your elderly folks, because you can get a piece of tape from where you might have a dressing or an IV or a Band-Aid, and try to peel it off. And if you don't use some sort of adhesive remover, you're going to peel their skin off with it. And that sounds really gross, but believe me, I've seen it and it's not pretty. Be nice to your patients and they'll be nicer to you. Digestive system is also called your GI system. It extends from your mouth to your anus. It's made up of the GI tract and the accessory organs. Digestion is the process of preparing food chemically and physically so that it can be absorbed. Elimination is the process of expelling those waste. So the path of your food goes from your mouth to your pharynx, to the esophagus, to the stomach, small intestines, large intestines, and then out through the anus. Now, you have to remember that the peristalsis is the involuntary contractions of the muscles through the GI system. It starts in about your esophagus and it goes all the way through until it exits the body. Your accessory organs are going to be your teeth. They cut, chop, and grind your food. Your tongue is going to shape it up and push it down into the pharynx. Your salivary glands, they secrete saliva or spit to break down your food. Your liver produces bile. It converts fats into glucose and it stores the glucose also. Your gallbladder stores the bile that the liver produces. And the pancreas produces insulin, a hormone that converts sugar into glucose. So food is moved into your stomach from the esophagus through the peristalsis waves. The stomach is a muscular pouch that churns and breaks up your food into smaller portions. The glands line the stomach that secrete juices that chemically break down the food. Sometimes you hear that as stomach acid. And that food turns into chyme after that process begins. The small intestines are about 20 feet long. Your enzymes from your liver and pancreas digest the chyme here. This is where the villi absorb the digested food into the capillaries, which we'll talk about later on. Villi, they're kind of like little fingers. They grab up everything and bring it into the lining. Large intestines, the water is absorbed here. The feces is formed with a mixture of what's left in the water, waste, bacteria, and mucus. Your digestive system, again, here is just a review. You've got your tongue and your oral cavity. And the back of that is your pharynx. Your saliva gland is up there as well as all the tongue and the pharynx and the oral cavity. Then you go down through your esophagus. It reaches the stomach. Then it goes through the intestines after that. Now, it's important for you to know that those intestines, the large and the small, they're divided up into smaller sections for identification. But for your TAR and for your test, all you need to know is what the small intestine does and what the large intestine does. So next you have your musculoskeletal system. It consists of your bones and your muscles and your ligaments, tendons, and cartilage. All of those work together to move your body and give it shape. So here you have a picture of the joint here on the left. This is what would be considered a hinge joint. It only lets the joint move in one direction. You can see you've got your muscle, you've got your tendons, and your bone. The cartilage is like the cushion. It's there in the middle. On the opposite side, you've got an example of all of your muscles, or your main muscles. I'm sorry, not all of them. And then you have your bones on the opposite side, and just your main ones for you to remember. So your bones protect the organs. They're hard and rigid, and they meet at a joint. The joints can either be hinge joints or synovial joints. Synovial joints are also called like ball and sockets. That would be an example would be your shoulder or your hip. It lets you move in multiple directions. A hinge joint is going to be one direction. That's going to be like your elbows and your knees. There's 206 bones that aid in movement and protection of your body. Muscles provide movement. They maintain your posture, produce heat. That can either be voluntary or involuntary controlled. Your heart and your intestines would be involuntary, whereas your arms and your legs, they're going to be voluntary. Atrophy is a term that means the muscle wastes away, it becomes weak, and it decreases in size. Contractures mean the muscle shortens and becomes not flexible. And range of motion can help with both of those conditions because they're going to help prevent the muscle from breaking down by movement and exercise. Normal changes in aging would include weakening muscles and tone loss. Movement slows down, your bones lose density, joints may stiffen and become painful, and your height is gradually lost. So now you've got this person, and their muscles are weak, so they can't hold themselves up for very long. Their movement slows, so they're going to have a harder time making it across the room before they get tired. And when they fall, their bones are brittle because they've lost density. That can be a problem, and it leads to a lot of hip fractures and knee replacements because of the joint stiffening up and becoming painful. Height would be gradually lost. That's due to that cartilage disc condensing and shrinking and getting wore out there between those joints in the spine. Now we have our cardiovascular system. So on this picture here, you can see the blue represents the unoxygenated blood and the red represents the oxygenated blood. And in the center there, you can see the heart. So your heart pumps your blood through your vessels and the cells. It's divided up into 4 chambers. You have your right atrium, which receives unoxygenated blood from the veins. Your right ventricle pumps it into the lungs. The left atrium receives the oxygen-saturated blood, and the left ventricle pumps out into the arteries for the rest of the body. Your valves allow the blood to flow in one direction only. Think of those as one-way doors. When you shut a door, it can't go past the hinge any further. When you open it, it goes one way only. So think of valves like that. They keep the blood from backing up, and they keep from mixing oxygen with unoxygenated. And it prevents stress on the heart, makes sure that you don't end up with varicose veins, which are usually due to little bitty valves somewhere in your veins malfunctioning, and now the blood can back up in those veins. The heart has valves too, only they're in a much larger scale. Systole is contraction and diastole is relaxation of the heart. So where else have you heard systole and diastole? You've got your systolic blood pressure and your diastolic blood pressure. So they're directly related to the heart, and that's why they're named like they are. So here you've got your photo for the visual learners. You've got that superior and inferior vena cava. Those are the 2 largest veins in the body. And then you have your aorta, which is your largest artery. That branches out into the all the rest of the arteries into the body. The only exception to that is going to be the right and left pulmonary vein and artery, which if you see those, they're opposite colors from the other. And that's because when the blood leaves the heart, it doesn't have oxygen yet. It has to go to the lungs first, and then it goes back into the heart, and then it goes back to the rest of the body. So instead of trying to remember arteries carry oxygen and veins carry non-oxygen, when you're thinking about the heart, just think about if it's leaving the heart, it's an artery. If it's coming back into the heart, it's a vein. When you're trying to remember what is which when you're thinking about your lungs, because they're the opposite of the rest of your body. Okay, so the first thing it does when it comes into that superior and inferior vena cava, it goes into that right atrium. So the right atrium gets all the blood from the body. Then it dumps it out through the valve there into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it goes up into the pulmonary artery and into the lungs. From the lungs, it comes back through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. Then it goes through that little door there, that mitral valve, into the left ventricle. And then it goes up through the aorta and out into the rest of the body. So remember, the ventricles are at the bottom of the heart, and the atriums are at the top of the heart. Arteries and veins. Your arteries carry oxygenated blood from the heart and the lungs. Your aorta is the largest artery. Coronary arteries carry blood to the heart itself. Veins carry unoxygenated blood and waste. Veins come together to the 2 largest veins near the heart called the inferior and superior vena cava, and we just looked at those. Capillaries are tiny blood vessels that transfer nutrients and other substances to the cells and pass waste into the bloodstream for the cell to get rid of it. Okay, so it rides along on little blood cells. And they carry the oxygen, they carry the food, they carry other substances back and forth to the cells, hormones, electrical impulse, whatever they've got to carry to these little cells for them to get their job done so that we can live. The blood does it. It's like your little workers. Think of them as FedEx. They carry what you need and they deliver it to your cells. They pick it up and they take it back to the station for packaging or for returns or whatever it's got to do. It's made up of plasma and blood cells. Your erythrocytes are your red blood cells. They carry oxygen, and they're actually red, and it's from your hemoglobin in your body that turns it red. Your leukocytes are your white blood cells. They defend the body. They're your little soldiers. They fight off your infection. Your thrombocytes are your platelets, and they prevent excess bleeding. They're the ones that does all the clotting. Plasma is the liquid portion of the blood. It's made up of mostly water, and that's where your nutrients are carried. So here's a picture of all the different types of blood cells for you guys to look at. The red one down there, that's the erythrocyte. And then you have those little bitty pieces, that's the platelets. The rest of those are going to be white blood cells. Normal changes of aging in the blood and the circulatory system or the heart is going to pump less efficiently. Blood flow decreases and your blood vessels narrow, which is one reason it's important to make sure that you don't get clogged arteries and clogged veins because they're already narrowing on their own. So when you get a small opening and you cram a bunch of stuff into it, it's going to be harder for the blood to get through it than if you just had a small opening. Respiratory system. Each lung is covered by the pleura. Pleura have two layers. One is attached to the chest wall and one is attached to the lung. The space in between those is filled with a thin lubricating fluid. So it prevents the friction and it lets the lungs expand and shrink without causing any pain in the person. Your lungs is what brings the oxygen into the body and they eliminate the carbon dioxide. So the parts of the respiratory system that you need to know are the nasal cavity. There's that pharynx again. The larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles, and the alveoli. I also want you to know what the diaphragm is because that is a very important muscle. It's down there at the bottom. It's that thin little muscle. That's the one that grabs a hold of your lungs, kind of, and it pulls them down to expand your chest cavity so that you can breathe easier. So your flow of inspiration is going to go from your mouth and your nose area into the pharynx, to the larynx, to the trachea, to the right and left bronchus, bronchi, bronchioles, alveoli, capillaries, and then into the cells. And then the cells change out all the oxygen for carbon dioxide in their waste. And then they give it back, and it reverses back out with expiration. It goes backwards. Cells, capillaries, alveoli, bronchioles, bronchi, bronchus, trachea, larynx, pharynx, and then out through the mouth and nose. Terms you need to remember. Respiration is the process of the body taking in oxygen and removing carbon dioxide. Inspiration is breathing in. Expiration is breathing out. Sputum is mucus, which a person will cough up if they're sick or congested. You also need to know what tachypnea and orthopnea, those are terms used to describe different breathing patterns. We covered those more in the vital signs lecture. But for now, I do want you to start familiarizing yourself with them. Tachypnea means you're breathing fast, and orthopnea means you have trouble breathing when you're laying down. Dyspnea is another one. That one simply means you're having trouble breathing. Normal changes in aging. Your lung strength decreases, lung capacity decreases, your oxygen in the blood decreases, and your voice weakens. Your nervous system is next. It's divided up into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Your central nervous system is your brain and your spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is the nerves that extend through the body. They go through the periphery. And in this photo here on the left, it's signified by the red, which is in central, and the blue, which is the peripheral. So your brain is divided up into sections as well. You have your cerebrum. It contains the cerebral cortex, which is where your thinking, analysis, judgment, emotions, memory, speech, controls voluntary muscles, and interprets messages from the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. Then you have your cerebellum. It contains the right and left hemisphere, and they promote coordination and balance. Your brain stem is what controls the involuntary muscles. Think of it as your regulator. Here's a picture of the brain divided out for you. You've got the different lobes here as well. Right now, you don't have to remember those lobes. If you plan on going further into this field, that would be a good thing for you to go ahead and start working on, because eventually you will have to know it. Okay, so you've got here, you have your left hemisphere and what it controls. You have your right hemisphere and what it controls. Please look down at the bottom and notice where the vision in the right field is controlled by the left hemisphere. And at the top, it says the olfaction of the right nostril by the left hemisphere. And you have the opposite on the right hemisphere. It's because your brain controls the opposite side of the body. So if you have a stroke, and you had a stroke on the left side of your brain, your right side of your body is what's going to be weak. And just the opposite, if you had a stroke on the right, the left side of your body is what's going to be weak. And that's important for you to know, because if their speech is impaired and they can't tell you what happened, but you can look on their chart and see they had a right stroke, then you know, well, their left side of their body is going to be weak. That's the side that I need to help them on. Your spinal cord is protected by bones. It conducts the messages between the brain and the body. There's 12 cranial nerves, and there's 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Normal changes in aging. Your responses and reflexes slow, sensitivity of nerve endings and skin decrease, and your memory loss begins. Most of the time, that's just short-term memories. In other words, I might not remember where I put my car keys when I came in the house, but I'm going to remember what I did when I was a kid. Please pay attention to where it says your response is slow. Just because I ask a question to a resident and it takes them a few minutes to respond doesn't mean they did not hear what I said. Just means that it's taking a little longer for their brain to tell their mouth what to tell me back. So your sensory system is part of the central nervous system because it contains receptors that receive impulses from the environment. It consists of your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. So the eyes are divided up into different sections. Your outer part is called the sclera. You have the cornea, which is in the very front of that sclera. It's the curvy part. Then you have the pupil, which is the black part of the eye there, and it widens and narrows to let in the light. If you have a stroke, or if you are on some type of drug, certain ones will affect how your pupil dilates. And that's one of the things that we can do to see when you come in the ER if you might have had a stroke, if there's something going on with your brain, or if you're in any kind of trauma. We shine a light towards your eye, not directly into it, but toward it, and we look at how your pupil reacts to that light. The retina is at the back of the eye. It contains cells that send messages to the brain. The whole eye itself is about an inch wide in diameter. It's located in a bony socket in the skull, and it's surrounded by muscles that contain its movement, and they help pull it around for you to see different things. Your ear provides balance and hearing. The outer ear is also known as the pinna or auricle. It's funnel shaped. It guides sound down into the canal, which is about an inch long, and your earwax is produced in your canal. Then you have your middle ear. It's separated from the outer ear by the eardrum, and it contains 3 ossicles that amplify sound and a eustachian tube which connects to the throat to equalize the pressure on the tympanic membrane. Your tympanic membrane is like your eardrum. Then you have your inner ear, and it contains the fluid that carry the sound waves to the nerve. It's also where your balance is at. And here's a picture here for you guys to understand what exactly it is you're seeing. You've got your pinna there on the outside, then your ear canal, then your eardrum, your middle ear, your inner ear, and your eustachian tube. Normal changes of aging would be vision and hearing decrease. Your balance can be affected. Your sense of taste, smell, and touch decrease. And your sensitivity to heat and cold decrease. Your endocrine system is made up of glands. Glands are organs that produce and secrete chemicals called hormones. Hormones are chemical substances that are created by the body that control certain functions. And different hormones do different things. So here we have a picture of the different glands in your body. So let's start at the top and talk about those. The very beginning up there, you have your hypothalamus gland. It's part of your brain, and it controls the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland secretes many different hormones. Some of those affect other glands. It also regulates the thyroid and the adrenal glands. Your thyroid is in the neck region. It affects your metabolism mainly, which controls the burning of your food for heat and energy. Your parathyroid is next. It helps regulate the calcium levels in the body. Your nerves require calcium to function smoothly, and the deficiency of that hormone can cause severe muscle contractions and spasms. It can actually be fatal too if you lose too much calcium out of your body. Okay, so next you have your adrenal glands. Those are those little glands that sit right on top of those kidneys. You can see them in the picture, the gland on top of the purple. They help trigger the fight or flight responses. They're important because they help regulate the carbohydrate metabolism. They control the reaction of stress. They regulate salt, water absorption. They produce adrenaline, and that regulates muscle power, your heart rate, your blood pressure, energy levels. All that is controlled by those little tiny adrenal glands. Then you have your pancreas. The pancreas regulates the level of sugar in the blood by producing insulin, which is the hormone there. And then you have your gonads. In the males, you have the testes, and in the women, you have the ovaries. So let's look at the males first. In the males, it secretes testosterone. And in the females, it secretes both estrogen and progesterone. The main function of the endocrine system is to maintain that homeostasis, influence the growth and development, regulate sugar levels, calcium levels, regulate the ability to reproduce, and determine how fast the cells burn your food for energy. Normal changes in aging would be your hormone levels decrease, insulin production lessens, and your body is less able to handle the stress. Your urinary system is what eliminates the waste out of your body and maintains your water balance. It consists of 2 kidneys, 2 ureters, 1 bladder, a urethra, and a meatus. Female urethra are shorter than males, and that's why females are more likely to get a UTI. It doesn't have as far to travel. Okay, so this photo here is a little bit blurry, but you can see the difference in the male and the female. The males are on the left. You can see it's got a longer urethra there. And you can also see there's not quite as much stuff at the back there behind the bladder as there is in the female. Components of your urinary system, again, the kidneys there, leading down to the urethras, all the way from the uterus, the bladder, and then out to the urethra. Normal changes of aging. Ability of the kidneys to filter blood decrease. That's where we get dialysis from. Dialysis is not a normal change. That is an extreme change, but it does start to decrease. Bladder muscle tone weakens, so you might have some incontinence. Frequent urination due to bladder holding less urine may be a problem. Your bladder might not empty completely and cause a greater chance of infection. Your reproductive system allows humans to reproduce. Reproduction begins when sperm and ovum join. Your sex cells are formed in the glands called gonads. And the function depends on if a person is male or female. So the male function is to produce sperm and testosterone. So here is a picture of the inside there. Notice how you've got your testes and it goes up through the vas deferens and it empties out. Pay attention, it empties out there into the urethra. So it actually shares a little opening, if you will, in the body with urine. It doesn't necessarily go at the same time, but it does share that opening. And then at the top there, underneath the bladder, you can see that prostate gland. That gland sometimes gets larger and it kind of pinches off the urethra there, causing it to be a little hard for the males to pee as they age. And it doesn't always happen, but that is a sign of aging sometimes. Normal changes of aging males, if the sperm production decreases, that prostate gland does enlarge. It doesn't always interfere with urination, but it can. And then the female function, you have your ovum manufacture. It manufactures estrogen. It manufactures progesterone, provides an environment for a developing fetus, and it produces milk for the baby after birth. So you've got your ovaries at the top there, and then your fallopian tubes, and then you have your uterus, your cervix, and then your vagina. Your normal changes in aging of females would be menstruation ends, your loss of calcium by decrease in estrogen, and your vaginal walls become drier and thinner. All right, guys, I appreciate y'all being patient with me. That is all of these slides. These next couple of slides are going to be reference pages, where I got the images to put your PowerPoint together with. The main reference that I use for information is your textbook